but I really am just motivated to help people. And I really think it's important coming from the lens of like autism is not inherently bad. It is not inherently, mean you can't function. Instead, I like to view it as in this society, it doesn't function well because of our social expectations, norms, and standards, and really working from a place of strength. Because there are a lot of strengths that come with having autism. It's just not always well understood by others.
Welcome to the inaugural Mountain Vista Psychology podcast. And Aaron, this is Sarah. We both work at Mountain Vista. I'm a therapist here. We have the privilege of having Sarah with us. Um, I'd love to hear, Sarah, just a little bit about you, your background, what you do every day, and anything that you feel like sharing with our people.
Yeah. So, hi, I'm Dr. Sarah Caple. I am a testing psychologist here at Mountain Vista. Um, and I think it's probably important to say what is a testing psychologist because we exist in a very small sliver of space in between um, mental health and the medical field. And we have a very unique lens and training. So I am specifically assessing clients who feel that they have autism, and that's the majority of my work. But I think a lot of people don't even really know that that exists, that there's different services, but we do a full, thorough evaluation that's just it's more effective and accurate when diagnosing autism. And I kind of came about the clinical field in a roundabout way. I used to be a Montessori teacher, and then I really loved working with kids one-on-one who are facing more challenges. And so I moved into school psychology, got my doctorate, and worked in the schools as a psychologist for a couple of years before coming into clinical practice. And I've actually found that's really helpful, especially when we talk about autism, because the place where it shows up, I feel like a lot of the time is at school. Um, so that's kind of how I got here. I, of course, went to school forever and ever. I got my doctorate, which was a 15-year journey. And then I wrote my dissertation on how we can decrease suicidality in young children through breakfast, exercise, and sleep. And that's also been a really big part of my work is just like meeting basic needs, getting back to kind of those basics when we're working with kids, adults, and families. So that's kind of my background spiel. Um,
Awesome. And today I know we're gonna dig into autism and specifically women and autism. Um, Tell me a little bit about why that is your uh, passion and what got you there. And yeah.
yeah. So when I was working in the schools, I really found that that one-on-one support for the kids who looked the most different, who were having the biggest struggles, came kind of naturally to me. And it made me feel like I was doing really meaningful and helpful work. And I wanted to have more of an impact, which is why I went back to school and continued my education. But coming into the clinical space has been really interesting, very different. Um, I'm working more with adults, which is kind of new for me. So in the past year, I've learned a lot about women with autism, especially presentations in the adult. Um, and through kind of that journey, finding that I really resonate with people on the spectrum, and then kind of taking my own journey and deep dive into my experiences and why this work feels natural to me. Um, but I really am just motivated to help people. And I really think it's important coming from the lens of like autism is not inherently bad. It is not inherently mean you can't function. Instead, I like to view it as in this society, it doesn't function well because of our social expectations, norms, and standards, and really working from a place of strength, because there are a lot of strengths that come with having autism. It's just not always well understood by others. So, how can autistic individuals make connections and get meaningful relationships by not having to change themselves? Because I think trying to fit into the model, trying to be something that's really hard can also have a lot of like unintended negative consequences that don't feel great. Um, so I just try to approach it a little bit differently so that I can be more helpful to my clients. Um, and a lot of it is working from my own experiences in the school and on my like own neurodivergent journey. Um, so yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that different approach. What does that look like? What does that mean? How does that manifest itself when you're working?
Yeah, so in graduate school, when we were learning, about testing, about the different diagnoses, this was also during COVID. I myself was diagnosed with ADHD. And to me, that was very profound because I'm working within this population and I'm working to support and identify, but still having a blind spot to kind of my own differences and my own struggles. So really trying to like pinpoint down how do I accommodate for these things? How have I managed to find success? And then how do we give that success to others in their journey? Um, and I think like one of the things I always acknowledge, there's a lot of paperwork when you go in to get an assessment um, for any mental health condition. The paperwork burden is huge, which directly relates back to these executive functioning challenges. It's difficult to get started. It's difficult to persist. It's difficult to interact with something on a computer that's not providing you any kind of like positive feedback. So, acknowledging the experience, acknowledging that hard work, and really then opening the door to a space that allows someone to feel comfortable being themselves. And so that means I have to take my mask off when I am assessing. If I come into an assessment and I am not authentic, I am not genuine, that is inherently difficult for a neurodivergent individual who is very sensitive to ingenuine behavior, um, power dynamics, and power struggles. And those pieces, I think, create a barrier to access sometimes. Because if you're not comfortable, you're not going to share with me the things that are most difficult. And I find that by sharing parts of my story with my clients, providing those real life examples, things that they don't even consider might be a part of this diagnostic criteria start to come up. Um, and I know it's not always easy. Sometimes it's clumsy, but like working with my clients in partnership instead of, in isolation with my data, I find to just be really helpful. So, like, I stem during my assessment because I don't want someone to feel like they have to hide that from me. I might sit cross legged in my chair because that's how I'm more comfortable to encourage my clients to find bodily comfort during the assessment. Um, Also, I think just being real and honest and sharing information, specifically sharing information. Neurodivergent people want information and they want it to be direct. And that's not typically how we communicate as a society. So,
Mhm.
really, just taking all of those things into consideration. What would I want as a neurodivergent individual? And then also acknowledging that every neurodivergent individual is different. So encouraging my clients, whatever you need. If it's hard to talk on a camera, let me know and we'll do a phone call. If it is difficult to get all this paperwork filled out, we'll do it together in the office. Just really encouraging that open disclosure so that people can be comfortable being themselves.
Mhm.
I think is my like main mission. I haven't got it all figured out yet, but I'm trying really hard.
Yeah.
Um,
And you touched a bit on masking, which um, I feel like is coming into the language of our society a little bit, but there might be a lot of people that still don't know what that means exactly. Can
Yeah.
you explain or expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so I think it's tricky because the word m anything is tricky with definitions. We should always be clarifying definitions, especially with our clients, because anxiety to me might be something totally different to you. So I guess I'll start with kind of those definitions. So I have kind of categorized it into 2 areas because everyone masks to a certain degree, and I think that's what makes a difficult term. For so I'll use the word holistic a lot. Holistic means a non-neurodivergent individual. A neurodivergent individual can be someone with a learning disorder like dyslexia or dyscalculia. It can be an individual with OCD. It can be low cognitive functioning, high cognitive functioning, and then ADHD and autism. Basically, anything you're born with that didn't come later is a neurodevelopmental disorder, which falls into neurodivergence. So that's a good place to start. And then we go into masking behavior. So a neurodivergent person will mask, which requires a high level of cognitive effort and energy that can often leave them feeling drained, tired, like they need time to recharge independently. Basically, it's just taking so much effort. Code switching is what people do naturally in their environment. So, code switching means when I go to have a talk with my boss, I don't interact with my boss in the same way that I would interact with my colleague. I'm able to differentiate, but I am not inherently changing behaviors about myself. I am still myself, but I am myself in a way that is meeting the expectations of the environment. And that's one of the areas with autism where we see an impact, right? You're not modulating or changing your behavior to meet the needs of the environment. Oftentimes, in masking, you're changing your behavior and masking things that you naturally want to do in order to fit in with the interaction. So that happens in addition to the code switching. And sometimes in autism, the code switching piece, especially in early childhood, is very difficult. And this is why you'll see young children treating adults and peers the same way, because there's a social context and cue there that they're not naturally and inherently understanding. Um, and so I think like differentiating between what is considered more typical or holistic and what we see in individuals who are neurodivergent is really important. I think high masking behaviors are especially common in adult women and highly verbal individuals on the spectrum. So in childhood, this might appear as a child who is very social, they're socially motivated, they're talking to everyone, um, but they're not able to form deep, meaningful relationships because they treat everyone the same and they're not taking into consideration some of those social impacts. But they're very talkative, so they appear social. So in adults, this is the person with autism who's able to engage in a conversation, who's found successful ways to navigate out in the world, but who's still struggling to form deep, meaningful relationships. Because in order to form a deep and meaningful relationship, authenticity, a genuine nature, and being able to share interests is how you then build the relationship. So while masking is helpful at not looking different, it's further creating barriers to building relationships, and it's having a lot of negative cognitive impacts. I like to use like a bucket. Like every moment you're masking, you're emptying a little bit of the bucket. So by the end of the day, you have less energy than your holistic peer of a similar age and profile. Does that kind of make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Um, do you find that there are particular issues related to masking and code switching for women?
Yeah, I and this is tricky because we get into societal values and ideals and how our system works and what is expected. Like, what is a typical family? What is a typical relationship? And those things we like to say they don't impact us, but every TV show we watch, every story on the radio, every presentation of a male or a female figure comes with some kind of context that's loaded, right? Like there's and you need to be more this way to fit in. And adult women, because they're socialized younger with different expectations, tend to have a higher level of masking. And that's kind of confusing. But what I mean, we have to go back into development. So, early childhood development, around fourth or fifth grade, we start to notice significant differences in the socialization of young children. Fourth or fifth grade is where we get into like mean girls. And mean girls is like the term I use, but really what we're talking about is this differentiating of gender within social groups and then the differences between those social groups. So little boys have different socialization that requires less masking for a neurodivergent individual. More outward expressions of behavior tend to be more acceptable. Um, Being more domineering towards peers can be viewed as leadership. Um, and then some of those interests can also appear more typical within their community, like interest in sports, like the little boy who knows all the sports facts. Um, Whereas the little girls, that social experience is much more complicated. It is a lot less said out loud. Young boys tend to say things out loud, express out loud, and young women tend to be more covert in their social experience, meaning there's unspoken expectations that are difficult to meet. There's how do you build a friend? How are you a good friend? And that really matters. Consistency really matters in young female relationships. And so, starting at that elementary age, there's already this beginning of masking. And if that's happening that early, as you get older, it becomes even more difficult to know where you've been masking because you've created these neural pathways in your brain that automatically go into this behavior. So the adult woman might not even realize that she's masking her challenges. Um, Whereas adult men, that might happen later. They might never have to mask. Their behaviors might be perceived as like leadership qualities, and they might be pushed into certain domains or avenues. And that's obviously not a rule. Um, but I think there are presentations that are very different depending on socialization in early childhood. Does that make sense? It's like you have to go
Absolutely.
back to understand the why now. Uh,
Yeah. And it's interesting how as we develop, those things take a physical, emotional, mental toll that kind of accumulate over time, I would imagine.
yeah, and this is why most people who are undiagnosed neurodivergent have also been diagnosed with depression or anxiety, um, because the toll isn't conscious. It When someone is masking, they're not always conscious of that masking. It takes a lot of personal effort and facing a lot of difficulty to be able to successfully unmask, especially with those layers of anxiety and depression, because you've been so drained. You never feel good enough, right? No matter what I do, I still struggle to make friends and connect. So there must be something wrong with me. And that's where you get into this place of like worrying about what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, what was said, feeling exhausted. And then the depression is because your environment is constantly reaffirming that there's something wrong with you. You're not good enough. Um, and so to pull all that back comes with its own challenges. You've figured out how to work this way, even if it's not successful. And I think that's the piece. It's not so easy.
Yeah. And it must be hard even when one recognizes that they have been doing this. The question becomes, what then? Like, you just stop. Well, like these are, like you said, they're not conscious decisions that someone is making. So even if you recognize that this is something that you do and you relate to that experience, what then?
Ha. Well, this is, I think, where I get into like my own story a little bit because I don't a lot of things in our profession I feel like are hard to understand if it's not your lived experience. And I don't think I could have fully understood masking until I realized how often I was doing it in my day-to-day life. And honestly, it's like online videos, Instagram, TikTok, talking about what is masking, right? I'm not learning about this from the literature. I'm learning about it as an individual who experiences it and whose content, like online, reflects that. Um, but the truth is, it's hard to know where I'm doing it, when, and how. And so I think realizing that I'm always on, like going from being a complete mess, incapable of functioning, to getting on a call with a client and being like, "Hi, how are you today? I am so great. You're wonderful." And yes, that is code switching to do my job, but it isn't the same because I have to pull back those things. If I am masking, I'm going to encourage masking in my clients. And I'm very motivated by my interest in psychology. It's my like fixed repetitive interest in helping others. And so that's kind of been the place of motivation for me to bring awareness to these behaviors. So it always takes a toll on me. And I think like I now am starting to choose where I mask and when and how, and it's very uncomfortable. So with my clients, I'm always masked and I'm masked with a mirror. So mirroring behaviors are great for building connection, making people feel comfortable, not as great for building relationships. So they're perfect for my job where I can mirror the client's experience, but it's incredibly draining. I don't even realize I'm doing it. I'll be like, was that too much? Was that not okay? But it's really beneficial for the client. Outside of that, I'm not mirroring for anybody because I'm starting to recognize how incredibly draining it is. Um, and I after I'm with a client, I'm done. I'm in bed for the rest of the day. That's what I'm doing, and that's what I tell my clients to go do. But then it looks like when I go to the grocery store or when I'm out somewhere in public, people aren't telling me their life stories anymore. They're not talking to me. They're not connecting to me because I'm not putting up this mirror, this mask for other people. But then sometimes I am left feeling like, did they like me? Was that a bad interaction? And so then I have to remind myself, well, it doesn't matter. You like you. And I think that's the hump that you have to get over because you figure out how to function, what's going on, you gain all these skills, but then you have to realize, I don't need all those skills all the time anymore because I am good enough.
Mhm.
And I think the trusting in yourself and feeling like you're good enough and the masking are literally like at odds with one another because the mask is what's accepted. You as yourself have never been accepted. So now how do we get to a place where I'm comfortable being that person
Yeah.
again?
It sounds a little bit, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's shifting the dynamic from masking for others to masking for yourself.
Ooh, I like that a lot because I that is what it is. I have control over it now, not even completely. Let's not pretend like I figured this all out. But that is what it feels like. And I wouldn't that was so eloquent. So good.
No, well, first of all, thank you for sharing from your own story and journey. I think it's super helpful for all of us to hear that. And I know it's something that I encounter many days of the week. People struggling with these things or thinking about them or working through them. Um, so it's a privilege to hear a bit of your story.
Thank you. It's not always easy.
It never is, and it's a journey. So we never arrive at some sort of destination.
Yeah.
Um, One thing that I encounter a lot that I wanted to ask you is oftentimes people, and you're on the testing end, so you're literally getting this. Um, but I hear a lot of people wondering whether or not they are autistic. Um, what would you say to them, and how can people know whether or not they're on the spectrum, and what is that journey into?
Yeah. So I'll start by saying every single person who has autism is different from every other person who has autism. Um, it it's you're born with autism, and then your experiences in the world shape that presentation. So that's why if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And so then you're thinking, well, how would I know if I had it if everybody's so different? How do you know? And it's tricky. It always is tricky. But I think the first and primary thing is there has to be some kind of evidence in early childhood of something being different. Um, and it doesn't always look the same. So, some of the traditional things we look for that are more obvious signs of autism are a, a, a delay in speech language, or a regression of skills, meaning like you knew how to walk, but then you stopped walking for whatever reason. Or noticeable difference in communication or social interaction when you're younger. Those are the obvious buckets. I would say if you have something in the obvious bucket, probably an assessment would be helpful if you haven't had one already. And this is where that testing psychologist piece comes in. Psychiatrists and medical doctors are able to diagnose. However, they are not trained in the tools that we use to do a complete evaluation. So if you've been to a medical provider or a psychiatrist and they are saying, I don't think it's autism because of this, this, and this, it's okay to not agree with them. And I would recommend getting a second opinion with a testing psychologist because if you think you have autism, there's a high chance you have autism. Allistic people don't sit around wondering if they have autism, and they don't research it to no end. So, like, if you're devoting time and you're finding enough that resonates with you, it's probably worth getting an evaluation. Um, some of the other things I think that are more nuanced is verbal language. So there's multiple presentations of autism, but one of them is hyperverbal, which makes it more difficult for others to realize there's a lack of social skills. So this is the kid who's talking all the time, interrupting all the time, talking about their wild ideas to no end, but still struggling to build and form relationships with others that feel meaningful to them. Um, and I think like that so knowing, like, your ability to talk is not in itself, a diagnostic feature. Um, the other piece I hear a lot is empathy. I hear, like, people with autism don't have empathy. I want to stand and correct that. People who have autism are deeply empathetic. These are the little kids who are having funerals for a fly who passed away, who are concerned when another peer is crying, but they lack the skills to appropriately support or help in those situations. And the empathy, like this, I guess, what's that called? Like a, oh my God, I can't think of the word, like a room. It's not a rumor, a myth. The myth that people with autism have no empathy exists because years of environmental and social reinforcement have told them that something they're doing is not right. And so now they are inwardly experiencing the empathy because their big emotional reaction to someone else's experience might not have been appropriate. It might have been penalized, right? Like, this is their moment, right? Something like that. So I think that care for others is always there. Social motivation is not part of the criteria. It can be, but if your child or you as an adult are very motivated to make friends, that's biologically inherent and not part of the diagnostic criteria. So just because you want to make friends, you're connecting with others, you're empathetic, doesn't mean that you don't have autism. Um, so I think like if you're wondering if you have autism, the wondering in and of itself is a good place to start with. Maybe an assessment would be best for you. Um, I think the next piece would then be to look at your relationships throughout your life. A lot of times in autism, we'll see that no close or warm relationships were formed throughout childhood and adolescence, or we'll see a hyperfixation on one friend where they only have one friend who they spend all their time with. You might also notice a stronger connection to the parent that seems developmentally inappropriate. So maybe like a 14-year-old still telling their mom everything that happens, not keeping secrets, not breaking rules. Um, so I think That is another piece to consider. Also, when you go in for an evaluation, if you have autism, it's really hard to answer the questions in the moment and to provide the things that maybe you thought about 100 times before you came in for testing. So write things down, make a list, record an audio recording, anything that works for you to get the information to the person assessing you, because we can only see what we can see. So I always encourage clients, like, if you think of a random thing after this, because now I've brought it up and you understand where you might see this difference, write it down, send me an email. That might be an easier way to communicate and organize thinking. Um, so I think those are some of like the big pieces I want people to know, because it doesn't always just look like that level 3 autism where we're nonverbal, lots of behavioral outbursts. That's one subset of autism. And I think that subset is much easier to identify in childhood. When we get into adulthood, we're talking more level 1, level 2 autism. And I don't love a level, but that's how it's categorized in our diagnostic tool.
And I would imagine if you have been subconsciously masking your whole life and you come into a testing scenario, that could present challenges even in itself. Like, are you just giving the information that you think the other person wants? Like, yeah, how do you or what would you recommend for people to try to be themselves or enter those scenarios in a way that will help them?
It's so tricky because if you've been masking your whole life, it's gonna be your default process. And that's why I come into it with being very vulnerable with my clients and like, these are the things I need to be successful. Like, there's no overhead lights on in my office. I'm gonna sit cross-legged in my chair. I might take my shoes off if you're comfortable with that. I'm going to be using my stimming tool. Um, just some of those things to normalize differences is what I do on my end. For the client, it's difficult, it's not always easy, and they might not even really completely understand what's happening, so I think trying to be more vulnerable with your assessor is helpful, and not every assessor is going to make you feel so comfortable being vulnerable, being yourself, so you have to find ways to communicate that information with the provider. So it could look like after testing, "Oh my goodness, I forgot to tell you all these things. I need you to know that it was so draining to be in your office. I know I probably looked okay, but now I'm having a hard time." And that's not easy to do, especially when you've spent your whole life hiding those things from other people and even yourself. Um, so there's not really like an easy answer, um, but really trying to like talk about the things that you don't talk about with other people. Um, some of the things that I think come up frequently are like self-harm behaviors, like hitting your head right when you're feeling overwhelmed. That's not something we are wanting to talk about with everybody, but it is indicative of some differences. Um, maybe you have meltdowns that last for days, but you don't talk about that with others because you're afraid that they might judge you or have feelings. So, really trying to think about the things that are noticeably different. And then, as you're going through the process and learning more about autism, things tend to come up and making sure you're sharing those in a way that's effective for you. So maybe all those little sticky notes around your house don't get into the email to your provider, right? Like, so really being a collaborator with your assessor.
That's super helpful. I always like to ask when I'm wrapping up with people or conversations or whatever, what question I didn't ask or what information do you think is really valuable that I might not have asked you about? Um, yeah, what do you think people need to know, and what didn't I ask you that's very important?
Yeah, no, I probably could talk about this forever and ever, but the thing that's like popping into my head is maybe a little loaded, but I think it's important to name our our current culture and society inherently is not very neuro-affirming. And one of the features of neurodivergence is a strong sense of justice, equality, and fairness. And I think right now, a lot of people who are neurodivergent are having a really tough time with our world and the state that it's in. And I think in community with other neurodivergence, we're talking about equality, accessing spaces, gender, these pieces that can be the LGBTQIA community, these pieces that are socially less talked about, I guess, right? Like we only get this media portrayal. And I think that deep feeling of difference right now is really strong. And so finding community is even more important because I think there's just all these society things that make it really unfair to have autism. If I were to move to another country like Finland, where there's less noise and commotion in the streets, there's a culture of more quietness, less eye contact, you wouldn't get diagnosed with autism because there wouldn't be an impact in your daily life and your daily functioning. So inherently, autism is a difference from the social norm.
Mhm.
And so that in and of itself is what's isolating and making these feelings of difference. And people with autism are always working to accommodate the holistic point of view and the holistic experience. And it's really hard, but we have to get confident being ourselves because I really do believe that we are the keepers of valuable information that can really be helpful to society and our world at large. We're good friends. We're, like all of these beautiful things that just right now are in a really tough place. And I think that leads to more depression. Like people with autism are crying for the world, for our community right now, and holistic people don't talk about it as much. So that's creating a little bit more of a barrier. But I think it's so important to know that if you have autism or you think you have autism, there's nothing wrong with you. It just means that our society has yet to get to a place where we are truly inclusive of all people and ideas. That's my takeaway at the end.
I love that, and it leads me to one more question, which is I haven't heard the term before, "allistic," um, so I'll admit that. But how can allistic individuals in the allistic community support and care and, um, yeah, just be more inclusive, generally speaking?
Oh, I love that question because I don't think I've ever really thought about it. I spend so much time thinking about how autistic people can, like, be included in the community and what they can do, and I think it kinda goes back to what I said, but, like, being mindful of what is socially expected, what is societal pressure when you're connecting with others. So I think it's so unconscious. Everything is socially driven and motivated. Everything you do, the way you dress, like we only wear clothes because other people are perceiving us. We only do things because others perceive us. So I think getting more curious. If you're in an interaction with someone and it feels a little off or different, or they said something that maybe you thought was rude, having the courage to ask, "Hey, did you mean for this to be taken this way?" Because not 100%, but almost 100% of the time, the person with autism was not intending to be harmful or hurtful, but because the autistic individual is used to a certain thing, it feels hurtful, and I think the unconscious has to be brought into awareness. Um, and it's really tough because I work with, a lot of kids whose parents will say, like, "I just don't feel connected to them." And you have to start looking for alternative ways of connection. Um, Someone with autism might connect by sitting close to you. Maybe they're not talking, but that's a way that they're saying, I care about you. I want to be in your space, even if they're doing their own thing. So, really looking for love in those different places, asking those questions. Unlike allistic people, people with autism love directness. It's all they want. Please just tell me why you're mad at me. I don't know.
Mm.
Just tell me. But then all the allistic community struggles with confrontation and talking about things that are harder. So I think we both need to talk more. The person with autism needs to name the things they're not doing. Um, Saying like, I really enjoyed my time with you today. I might not have shown it in other ways, but I want you to know it was a really great conversation. Just adding that little, sentence stem allows the allistic person to know you're connected to them. And for the allistic person saying, hey, did you have a good time? Because you might not know. With a neurotypical person, you would probably know, but you might not know with a person with autism.
That is amazing. Thank you.
Thank
Um,
you.
it's been really awesome getting to connect with you and learn from you. Thank you so much for sharing from your experience, and um, so grateful that you're out there helping so many people, and I'm grateful that I get to be a colleague of yours. So
Thank you so much, Erin. This was lovely. This is my first time, so I hope it went well.
it did. Thank you, and for all of you who are watching, we're excited for you to learn more about Mountain Vista and all of our therapists here, and look out for more interviews coming up.
Yay.